And so we're actually less than 2 years since that, but a lot of people are familiar with text to text. But all three of the products here go into several other modalities, right? We've got audio, we've got video, imagery. So I think that's really exciting. But maybe we could actually just start with the why now, and specifically maybe the unlock that we've seen with unstructured data, right? Before we used databases and everything needed to be really structured in order for us to make sense of it. Today, that's not quite the case. So Gaurav, maybe we start with you, and what do you see really today as the why now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really exciting time generally, just because, obviously there's been a couple of key breakthroughs just in terms of technology, right, with transformers and diffusion models and so on and so forth. But I think the key here is we're able to use a lot more data to train these models now than ever before, right? And that there's a bunch of things happening both on the hardware side, the software side, right, and the data side to enable that to happen. And that's why we're seeing such amazing results, right? If you look at a lot of what the key players in this industry are doing, they're just training these models with more and more and more data every iteration, right? And that's able to produce reliably better and better and better results, which is pretty amazing to see. And besides, and it's not in sight so far, right?
Yeah. Carlos, maybe we'll go to you before we talk about Descript in a second.
Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely fine. I think it's correct. The key message for us, or experimentation for ElevenLabs has been if you put garbage in, garbage out, right? If the quality of the data that you put in is not that great, then essentially what you end up producing is half baked. With lots of mistakes and things like that, right? And we can see that with Whisper, how many of you have tried Whisper and it comes out as subscribe, 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 and things like that, right? All the time. That's
it's true.
We've seen it all the time. But so I think for us, there's been a layer in which initially we train it with a lot of data, and then over time we end up curating the data to make sure that it is very high quality. Otherwise, you're not able to achieve the results that you are expecting, or that you, your consumers or your businesses would need, right? But that's a fundamental a change that has happened in the market. Amounts of data being used with transformers and LLMs to generate this human-like content generated, whether that's speech or text or anything else, right?
Yeah, 3D models. We're seeing all types of stuff.
Yes.
So the reason I wanted to wait to talk to you, Laura, is because I don't know how many of you have used Descript, but any guesses on when Descript started? We talked about ChatGPT, November 2022. So Descript has been around since 2017. So the reason I wanted to frame that is because obviously the last couple of years, very exciting, but machine learning, AI, the 50s is when this really got going. And obviously there have been unlocks, but I want to get your pulse, Laura, on the importance of putting AI at the forefront, right? So, a lot of AI is embedded in the applications that probably people in the room are building as well. But Descript long used machine learning before really saying, hey, you're using machine learning, AI, et cetera. So what are your thoughts?
That's right. So Descript is software that lets you edit video just like a text document. So if you can edit a Google document, congratulations, you're also a video editor. If you can, just download Descript, and now you can edit video. And it turns out that the technology that sort of undergirds that is in fact AI. But we haven't traditionally come forward and said we're an AI video editor. There wasn't this huge reward in the hype cycle for saying that. So, we didn't have marketers saying it. But also what we found is that customers didn't care. Right? They don't care what is the technology that is creating this value for me. What they care about is there is value here. This is helpful for me. And so that was long our way of designing software, and it probably would have continued that way forever, except that actually, when I think about the thing that is making us change our minds, in addition to some of these cool models that are coming out, it is that the way that humans and computers are interacting is totally different. So you can talk to your computer now. You can use human language to communicate more subtle intentionalities that you have for how you want to edit your video or create your video. And so as this technology has gotten better, we've thought, well, gosh, do we actually want to design AI in the product differently? And if so, how? And so with our latest release that's launching next week, we're actually bringing all of the AI features that we've long had in the product into the same space and adding a ton of new ones. And we had a big discussion with our design team about how do we do this? And one of the big discussions we had is is AI a magic wand, or is it an entity? And one of the big decisions you have to make there is that traditional creators are much more used to interacting with Pro Tools software or creative software in a point and click way. And so they want a magic wand. But you have this whole new wave of people that are now generating and editing video and audio, and they're used to using kind of more of this entity interaction. They want an entity. Then you start talking about an entity, right? And you get into internal discussions like, I don't know if it's an entity. That might be a bad idea because, you know, what about our robot overlords, our inevitable robot overlords, right? That's kind of like one side of the debate. And then hilariously, you have the other side of the debate that's like, I don't want an entity because actually it turns out this technology is really stupid sometimes. And if you make it an entity, you know, you said like, hey, welcome, this is like your co-editor. And it turns out your co-editor is just like a total moron that makes horrible, you know, suggestions sometimes because it's hallucinating. And so we're like, okay, how do we deal with that? So what we decided to do with this newest release is we're calling it Underlord. And it's a nod to the potentially apocalyptic future of AI, while also admitting that right now this thing is kind of like a very eager, like somewhat competent intern that does a really great job at the first pass of the worst parts of your workflow. So that's some of the story about how we've thought about designing with AI over the years.
Nice. And I forgot to mention, we will be doing demos. Does this still work? Yes. We will be doing demos of Underlord and all of the products up here today at the end, and you'll also get to play around if you'd like. But I'd love to get both of your pulse. Like, how do you think about that same question? What part of AI do I put at the forefront, or do I just use this really powerful technology and kind of give my users what they want, but not really sell this AI thing too much?
So I'd say, you know, at the end of the day, you have to solve customer problems, right? Like that's what we're trying to do, right? I think the biggest mistake that can be made is to say, hey, here's a technology. You can have technology, do whatever you want, right? Like people can't just take that and be like, okay, I know what to do with this, right? I think you have to mold it into a product that solves a problem at the end of the day. So I think that's like traditional. Nothing's changed there, right? It's exactly the same as before. And if you're not doing that, then essentially you're going to see retention problems, right? You're going to see people coming in, trying out the thing, not knowing exactly what to do with it, not working perfectly for their use case, and then they'll leave, right? Kind of tourism is what we're calling it, right? But I think at the same time on the marketing side, like for stepping away from product for a second, there is something to be said about sort of having AI in your message on the marketing side. And here's why. Like if I just say, I have a better product, it's so much better, you won't believe it. I'll be saying the same thing that people have been saying for literally 100 years about every product, right? Like, yeah, trust me, it's better, right? Trust me, come on and try it out, right? Like this is every single product that exists, right? But putting in that AI term in there, just from the marketing side, is just tactical, right? Actually lets people, you know, understand, oh, wait, this is going to be a step change, right? Of course, if you don't meet that expectation when they land in the product, you're going to have a problem, right? But if you're able to meet that expectation, putting that in kind of does inform people about like, okay, this is not going to be sort of like, you know, the better product. It's going to be a step change, you know, compared to everything else we've seen. So that's the general guide. I do feel like a lot of people are just throwing in the AI term on the marketing side now just to kind of get, you know, get the eyeballs there. But like, and maybe that message will kind of get lost a little bit. But so far, the innovation has just been so strong that the message has kind of remained strong. And if it continues this way, you know, the marketing side can continue as well. But, you know, at some point, it might get muddled. We'll see.
Maybe just I can add on a modifier for you, because I think not only do you have to market the product, but if you use this bucket term of AI, right, that means many different things. Do you own your models? Do you build your own models? Are you an API wrapper? And so I'd love to hear from you, Carlos, at ElevenLabs in particular, like in building your own models as well, like how does that play into the whole marketing packaging, thinking about what you share and what you don't?
Yeah, we need to be open. Like we are an AI company. Sorry, guys. And we say it all the time. Like we say like we do AI voices, we do AI sound effects. We're going to be doing AI music in many ways. So for us, like it's all about the audio sphere, right? So it's like that layer infrastructure that allows you to create high quality, engaging content, whether that is like with voice, with like audio overall, right? And the way we thought is like, well, actually, there wasn't really a good quality text-to-speech available before we invented our own site. So like we were fundraising initially, it was always like, it is difficult because the market is not there. Like how are you going to be getting customers and so on? So it's like, it was really tough in the early days, but we thought like, look, if you're able to deliver quality, that voices that sound engaging, that like business can build applications on top of it, then you end up having like a market that is just fully untapped, right? So how do you do that? Like AI voices, simple and plain, right? And that worked really well. So we started with like the LLM, the infrastructure layer, pure like API play with a very simple UI. And that was like end of January last year when we launched the product. And we thought like, well, actually, there's going to be like some pieces of like some content creators that might want to use the UI, but we expect like on the API side, it's going to be quite big purely because like people might want to build their own applications on top of it. And it worked really well. And since then, what we also realized that like, well, you cannot expect all of the business to have the capabilities to like build their own applications. So what if we end up going full end to end and we build our own applications for areas where we really care about? And that's how we end up creating like projects or audio native or like the dubbing product and a bunch of other pieces, right? So it's been very interesting for us. And of course, we need to say, we always say that it's AI driven because at the end of the day, we're a foundational model that happens to also build applications on top of it. But I think like the beauty of it is that like anyone can build anything they fancy on top of the API. And today we power quite a lot of different companies. More than 41% of Fortune 500 companies use ElevenLabs. We power a lot of startups, and we are very proud to help all of these companies like succeed as well, right? So it's been very interesting, like having both sides, both motions, like the pure API play and the application layer on top of it.
Yeah.
It's challenging as well, because then you end up having like two different profiles in terms of like on the product side, on the engineering side and everything, right? So you always need to balance it.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we can actually jump straight to that question of competition. I feel like if there's one question that comes up on this podcast the most, everyone's excited about AI and they're like, okay, well, where does differentiation come up? Where do moats arise? I'd love to probe all three of you on that. Like, where do you think in this, I know we're early, but where do you think you can stand out? Do you really need to be building at the model layer? You talked about the infrastructure layer, or can you really just build a really great UI and capture the app layer? Like, what do you think about that?
So maybe I'll start here by saying, again, not much has changed in terms of like, there have been companies built in the past on just great design, right? So I think there's no reason that they can't be built on the AI side, right? But at this point of the journey, there's so much sort of to innovate on, so much to build on. It does help to have models that are sort of foundational and built in-house, because it does give you that extra differentiation and that extra step. It is a competitive sort of field, and sort of the deeper you can go and the more sort of you can build from the ground up, really connecting sort of these different layers together, right? You can deliver super fast speeds on your models. You can deliver the highest quality that anyone's seen, right? And you can deliver a great user experience that solves a real problem, right? Then you have an advantage there, right? So I would say though, for consumer companies, which we're a consumer company, right? Like we're used by literally millions and millions of people around the world, right? And people make over 100,000 videos a day published through our platform. For a consumer company, it does matter a lot to have that differentiation at this stage. I think in the longest term, if you think about what differentiates a consumer company in the longest of terms, is probably just brand, right? And that's kind of what you're building over a period of time. And the only thing that the only way a brand dies is like with the generation, right? So you have to make sure that it also takes a generation to build a brand too, right? So I think that's kind of the ultimate goal of where you want to get to. But I think in the meantime, there's many moats that last like different lengths of time, whether that's a data mode or a model mode, or like whether it's a UI, UX mode, whatever it might be.
So at Descript, I would say that we are a horizontal editor, and we're a very powerful human editor, which is something that I think a lot of kind of newer, just started in the age of AI, in like the second chapter of AI companies can't say, because like it takes a long time to build a really powerful horizontal human-driven editor. So you can do like really complex editing jobs with Descript if you already are like an expert who's great at this work, and you can do it really quickly with low barriers to entry if you're new to it. For that reason, I think the application layer is especially important to us. And I almost see us as a mirror to kind of what ElevenLabs was saying, where I think like in general, we have a may the best model win sort of mentality when it comes to all of the different models that we use in our application layer. And that's because we're trying to do everything, not just AI voices, but things like eye contact, things like avatars, things like AI speech, transcription, editing video with text. If there's like a cool thing happening in AI, when video generation, when Thora comes out, that will be in Descript. We're going to have it. And so I think like generally we have an attitude that is may the best model win. We want to give our customers the absolute best experience. If we don't see interesting enough work happening in a space that we want to be in, we'll build that model. And I think there are real places for Descript to differentiate because we own so much of the editing workflow and have really great editing workflow data that like that may be a place where our models become differentiated. But in general, if you're trying to provide a ton of different services to customers across a ton of different workflows, it can really make sense to not try to build every single one of those in-house, but instead to be like very thoughtful about where it makes sense to own versus buy or borrow.
I think like there is an element here on like if you think about purely about differentiation in these days, like because the market has evolved a lot from like purely foundational picks and shovels like a16z has like been promoting for a very long time, and now the transition towards the app side, like what you end up like thinking about, like or how I think about defensibility is pure about like your users, your consumers, or your businesses, right? Like that's essentially what will drive defensibility over the long term. And if you think about like, I don't know, like Instagram or Meta or like a Facebook in the early days, what was their defensibility? There was literally nothing out there, but they were able to fast grow, like outpace everyone in terms of growth, like deliver value. And then the UI was not even that great, right? But it was actually like, you were feeling there was a part of the community and it was like the experience that you were getting, right? So the defensibility was coming from the actual users versus the product itself. And I think like the transition that we're seeing today from the foundational models towards the like app side, it's actually very interesting because then you're able to engage different type of generations or different type of users that like if you retain them and you give them the best experience possible, they will stay there for like for the coming years, right? Whether that is because they're building their own like their own applications on top of it, or because they essentially like are like, well, I want to use your app overall. And the way we also think about this at ElevenLabs is like layers, right? So you end up having the foundational layer, which is like the research that we provide, right? Like we do like LLMs, and essentially we provide the best text to speech and AI voices in the market. Fantastic. What else do you have on top of it? The data that we've acquired, that we've licensed from partners, the products, end-to-end products that we're building, the partnerships that we have, the customers that we have. So you end up creating all of these multiple layers that essentially end up building your core defensibility in the market that hopefully will sustain us for the coming years, right? But like if like that's how like I've seen it for a very long time, and I think like as the market changes, if one of the layers like ends up getting replaced, absolutely fine, because then essentially you have all of the other ones that will back you over the long term, right?
Yeah, and something you spoke to there is just like this new generation, and I think we're all kind of trying to figure out what can now be done with AI. You talked about UX even, or designing a new UI. Voice is now in the mix in ways that it wasn't before, but then you also have this question of, you know, do I want to completely reinvent the wheel, show someone, you know, a very powerful UI that they're maybe just not familiar with and that you don't retain them. So Gaurav, I'd love to probe you on retention. I mean, even just from the perspective of desktop versus mobile, you do have a mobile app. How do you think about designing for that? Because we've seen over and over the last, let's say 2 years, there's this extreme willingness to try, but then I think someone internally coined this like AI tourist phenomena, right? It's people try and then a lot of them do leave. So how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's something we think about a lot because at the end of the day, you know, I think you can kind of go by metrics and you can really worry about like, oh, like there's a retention number, it should be at that number. And, you know, you can kind of get caught up in that a little too much when the reality is like those micro optimizations are not going to solve whatever retention problem or any other metric problem that you might have, right? At the end of the day, it's about the user experiences. It's about solving a real problem, right? Like I think generally if you want a complete hit end to end, you need to have like a breakthrough technology that's applied to solve a very specific problem that a user actually has, right? And then you need to have an engine that can deliver that solution to people who have that problem as quickly as possible across the world, right? If you have all those pieces, then you won't have a retention problem or an acquisition problem or any other problem, basically, right? Now, the cool thing about this time right now is like the technologies are being developed and there's like actually a crazy number of technologies out there, right? I think it's a very unique time from that perspective, right? And, you know, for product people, the main problem is, hey, like how do we actually solve problems, right? Actually solve real problems that people have, right? And not just sell the technology as technology, right? Like, hey, we have technology, right? Like just that, right? Or but actually convert into like a real value delivery for users for a specific use case, even a niche use case, right? Whatever it might be, right? And then I think for marketers, the problem is, how do we actually educate people that there's a new way to solve these problems, right? Like people may not think the first thing, oh, you know what, I'm gonna Google AI for this, right? Like that might not be the first thing that people think about, right? It might be, they might be searching for just whatever they were normally doing, right? Which may be something that takes a long time. Or they might be like, not aware that there's new solutions available to these problems, right? So I think that's sort of the end to end. I think if you focus on that at that level, like all the other numbers sort of follow on their own. And that's kind of what we've seen both across our desktop app and our mobile apps as well. And, we're in the consumer space. So, retention is definitely, a very hard game to crack compared to say B2B businesses. But we've been able to do it really well. And like, I think it's because of that high level focus across like, technology, product, and marketing.
Yeah, maybe Laura, you used to work at Twitter. What are you learning in terms of, I mean, obviously it's not a complete overlap, but products that reach so many people on, we're talking daily active users. What have you learned from that space that you can apply to AI when you are trying to fix this retention problem?
I will say that I am so glad to be out of the game of trying to optimize for MDAU, for monetized daily active users. I think that daily active use is like a pretty terrible metric to uncover customer value, right? Like, and so one of the things that I just love most about working at Descript is being able to identify alternative metrics to think about, like, have I done right by the customer? Two that I really like to think about that are a bit in tension with each other, they act as guardrails, is time to expression and editing richness. So I think like if Descript is doing its job really well, the amount of time it takes you from like starting a project to getting it into a shareable state, whether you're a marketer who is like trying to repurpose a webinar into clips, or someone who is more of a creator trying to make your latest YouTube review, or you're someone in learning development trying to create a training. I want the amount of time it takes you to create that to go down and down. And so you're able to just like create more and more of the content. Is anyone here a creator in any way, like have a YouTube channel or a marketer? Do you know about like just like the gaping maw that can never be fully fed or sated for content that I find so many of our customers are just staring into with despair? And so getting kind of their time to expression down is really important. But one of the ways you do that is just like by creating worse and worse content that, it's just a roll with an iPhone and you slap some captions on it, which is great for some use cases, but for others, just like a missed opportunity. Like you could have done so much more to create really high quality video content. And so if Descript is also winning on increasing the editing richness, the number of jobs that you're able to do with us and the number of things you're able to do to transform your media and make it really high quality, the interaction of those two metrics is such a great way to drive towards customer value. I will say that like what Gaurav said around just like good product fundamentals with retention totally resonates with me. My attitude toward the tourists is you've got to triage the tourists. Some component of them just don't have a use case for your software. They want to create a voice clone. They want to see it. They're like, ooh, that looks cool, but they don't have anything to do with that voice clone. And it's like, great, let's let them do that. That's awesome. Maybe one day you'll think about Descript or ElevenLabs and come back. But then like, who are these tourists who are actually like they have a legitimate use case and they just don't know it yet? They could be using video to communicate within their company. They could be using text-based video editing to create all of their marketing clips and they don't know that yet. And how can I create software that activates really well, that displays all of our use cases and lets them have like a good first time? And I find that like often activation and retention problems are just activation problems in disguise in a trench coat. And so what I really try to focus on to improve retention is just like the activation experience, which again, quick plug, we're redoing all of our UI. It's launching tomorrow. Everyone use it. You're going to be activated and become video creators. I know it.
Next time
Actually,
we do
let
this,
me
there'll be
jump
a
in
lot
there
more hands.
on a quick thought that you had in the beginning. Just having come from a social media background as well at Snap, such a good point about just DAU and like how that can be such a trap to kind of, I think social media companies obviously optimize DAU for a reason because money's coming from, exactly, money's coming from a different source, right? And so actually it's good to be out of that game. And really interestingly, with the generative AI space, it seems like it's kind of having the opposite effect on what it's trying to achieve. Like social media on one end is using AI as well, but really to consume time from people as much as possible, right? Consume as much of your time, and it's succeeding, right? And on the other end, generative AI is actually kind of giving back time to people, right? So they can actually do more. So pretty cool.
Yeah, we talked about this on a recent episode, how some tools, I'm sure people would resonate with this. If you had one excellent session in it, right? It could have saved you 4 hours of work in 5 minutes. Like that is the equivalent, or that's actually more valuable than spending 20 minutes every day in an app. And you don't see that in the same metrics, right? So I love that you brought up different metrics that you're paying attention to, Laura. Carlos, is there anything that jumps to mind there for you in terms of how you might rethink a business model, right? In terms of what metrics you're paying attention to, the way that you're monetizing a product that might be different, because the willingness to pay we've also seen is there, even if it is just, I'm using this once a month, once every 2 months even.
Yeah, and I think like it's a really good point, right? Because like you end up having, I kind of feel it's more like frustration from consumers where like our time is being taken away all the time from like social media and different apps that they're trying to like get us stuck in there and we're like, oh, like come back. And now like with generative AI, we're all thinking like, actually, how do I get some of my time back? And like some consumers actually feel that like if they need to do something twice, the product is not working well. Right? Like it's that element that we've gone from one side to the other side. So like probably like someone in the middle is what it fits well. I was actually like in a meeting with a customer and we presented a C-level last week and 10 days ago. And like the question they came back with was like, okay, so how much time am I gonna save? And I was like, well, you're gonna save anywhere between 50 to 60 times the time. Like it's gonna be like 50 to 60 like it's slashed by 50 and 60. And they were like, no, that's not possible. And I was like, let's do the math right now. And we did the math and it was very interesting, right? So like their eyes were like, wow, how is that even possible?
I know.
Exactly, right? Like, so I think like there is an emphasis on that side, but I think like sometimes we try to overemphasize the effects of like the efficiency that you're getting with generative AI, when in fact generative AI is not perfect. Right. And I think like that's one of the main reasons why like the AI tourists like are there and they're very big. Is because like everyone comes with like such a big expectation that he's going to be solving all of my problems and he's going to be cooking dinner for me tonight as well. And unfortunately, it's not going to cook dinner for you. It's just not going to solve all of your problems, but it's going to help you quite a lot. Either because you can do a lot of more monetization with your customers, with like you can reach new markets, or you can actually do it much quicker, right? But I think like framing it on actually what is valuable for you as a business or as an individual is much more important. So like initially, like our metrics were like pure about like usage, right? And over the past like months,
You can help me with this.
and over the past month, we've ended up like switching towards like usage is important, but that does not define like the long-term success of an actual customer for us, right? It's more about like the activation side. It's about like actually what's the use case that you have and how do we measure that over the long term, and how do we understand and try to infer the use case based on what like the way you're using the product, right? So that we can offer you the best tools and the best tips and all that stuff. For us, that's essentially like those are the key metrics today versus like usage. Usage is still super important, but I don't really mind if someone like that uses the product today and then doesn't do it for like a week or 2 weeks, because I know that like if we've nailed it, they're gonna come back 2 weeks later, right?
Yeah.
That's I think that's how we are thinking about it.
You don't have those social notifications that are like a friend of a friend of a friend maybe posted something. Please come to our app. All right. Well, so we're going to open up to questions very soon. So if you have any questions, start thinking about them. But I want to do rapid fire 1 or 2 more. So something that's definitely come up here is the importance of optimizing an application for a specific role, right? Or someone's use case. Like, who are you? What are you trying to do? So each of you actually comes from different backgrounds, right? So Gaurav, you've done design and development, you've been an engineer. Laura, you've been immersed in product. Carlos, operations. And so those are roles where there's like, gosh, I don't know how many other people who fit that subset. So I'd just love to hear your perspective, independent of your company. How do you think of AI as, let's say, the next 5 years? Like, what does an AI-powered engineer look like in your case, Gaurav, or like an AI-powered operations person? Like, what do you need? Like, what's missing? Are there products out there that actually fit that use case and are doing it well? Maybe we can just go down the line real quick.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about it from an engineering perspective, or even from a design perspective, I think maybe the closest on the engineering side would be like a tech lead manager, someone who's actually getting, setting up the overall architecture of whatever's being built, right? But a lot of the work's been done by AI, and they're coming in, they're making edits, they're like, maybe we need to change this, reviewing stuff, right? Same on design, right? Like kind of giving high level instructions on like, let's have this, let's maybe use this style over here, let's change, these components, right? And getting those, that output back and kind of reviewing it, leaving comments the same way that a manager might, right? And being able to produce hopefully a lot more, value and output. So that means that companies can be, going to a much larger revenue scales with way fewer people, which is going to be interesting.
Awesome. Laura?
Yeah, I think a lot about this. What's the AI product manager? But instead, I mean, the paradigm that I use is more like, how do I want to interact with AI to do my job better? And one of the use cases I'm excited about is a rubber duck who talked back. You guys hear about like rubber ducking, where you keep a rubber duck on your desk and you talk through difficult problems with that rubber duck. And I think like I'm never going to cede control of like the creativity and the genius to like the entity. Like, clearly, have you met me? Like I'm in charge of that. But I think like it can be fun to toss the ball around with someone. And I think like I'm excited to see how AI continues to develop to be like a fun thing to toss the ball around, and then can take all of the stuff that you're just like spewing out, all of the kind of word garbage, and turn it into something just like crisp and readable and easy to understand. So that's a use case that I'm excited about.
I like it. It sounds like I want an AI BS detector for myself, right?
Yeah, then it gives you
Say,
feedback
"You're
on your
gonna do this
delivery.
thing. Why haven't you done this thing?" Next.
I think it's from an operations side is like even more complex, right? Because like there is so many sub processes, like so many like things that you need to do. Like how do you automate, or how do you get someone to help you on that front, right? So ideally, you end up having like a product that helps you do like twice as much in the same amount of time. Not because you like, I'm thinking about it from an efficiency perspective, but much more how I can potentially generate more revenue for the business, right? So I think like that's where like potentially and hopefully like the market is going to be going. Like on the sales side, like it's much easier because you end up having AI SDRs these days. We'll end up having AI CSMs and all of those pieces like that are going to be like already there in many cases, right? But purely on the operations side is there's a lot more complex. Like ChatGPT is your friend for sure, right? Or Anthropic if you use it, or like any of those tools like that will help you like generate quite a lot of different things on a day-to-day basis. Is that giving you a 2x? Not yet, right? So I'm not sure. Like I still haven't found the right product that like would help anyone optimize and become like 2x themselves.
Yeah, maybe someone will build it in the room. I guess final question, just anyone feel free to jump in. We talked a lot. I mean, all three of your products have a lot of customers. People are using it. Seems like maybe you've cracked the retention problem. What challenges are you facing, whether it's like regulation or like not having the right models or hoping that the open source models catch up, or just curious if anything jumps out where, just calling out a challenge that you'd like to be solved in the next few years?
Yeah, I'd say for us, it's hiring, actually. It's very traditional, right? But I think, hiring the right people to solve the particular problems that we're having in our company, right? Like, and problems grow really quickly if the company's growing really quickly, right? And you have to kind of keep an eye on like all the different things that are happening, where new needs might come up, right? And especially with a company like ours, where, we've existed for about 3 years, and, there's video companies that have been around for a long time. We've passed everybody in revenue in like literally a year and a half. And with growth at that scale, you just have to constantly be thinking about like, what are the new problems that are coming up and who can we hire to solve those problems, right? So I think that's like a very traditional answer. And maybe there's some AI recruiters out there, but we have a great team. So, I don't think we need them, at least not yet.
Maybe AI can help with that.
Yeah.
Laura?
I think it's just like that we're in the middle of a paradigm shift, right? Like we haven't gotten to the end of it. We're in the middle now. And what I can tell you is that the way that we're going to edit video and audio in a year or in 2 years is going to look completely different than how we're doing it right now. But we don't know how yet. And on one hand, like that's why I'm here. That's like why I'm doing this job, because like this is a place where the next generation of like product managers and designers, like we're going to reinvent the way that humans and computers interact with each other. Like someone's going to figure it out. And God, I hope it's like me or that I'm part of it in some small way. But that's also just like a very fragile moment, right? Like it's both a challenge and an opportunity. And I think it's like the challenge of our industry right now.
I think like for us, it's like there's two sides of it. Like what is definitely hiding. I can relate a lot on that. It's difficult to like we've gone from like 0 to like tens and tens of millions in months, not even years, in months. And it's really difficult to find people that have experienced that previously. Also because like the market has evolved very quickly in such a short time frame. So that's one side. So there is a lot of commitment that like we expect from people at the company and that like we need to be able to actually keep growing at this pace. And like on the research side, it's extremely difficult to find the right researchers on the engineering side, on the operations side, on the sales, even support like across the board, right? That's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is like preventing misuse, right? And I think like realistically, that is something that like we have an entire team dedicated to that day and night, 24/7. But every time that we put together something, there is like 20 other different things that like people make up to like try to game it. And it is similar to like fraud, where like you're always like 2 steps behind, right? And it's really difficult to catch and like keep fighting it. But like so I think like about those 2 elements are like the biggest challenges that we're constantly facing as a company. Like we're winning, but still like it's just a matter of like making sure that like you're constantly innovating and having resources for something that like it is important. Otherwise, like regulators come or like consumers complain and things like that, and people complain, right? So
yeah, you need unprecedented people for an unprecedented pace. Everyone give all 3 of these folks a round of applause. Thank you. For questions in advance of some very quick demos that they're gonna give us. Laura, who's our wonderful producer at the A16z podcast, is gonna go around. So if anyone does have a question, just raise your hand and she'll come find you. Do we have any AIs in the audience? No. I see one there. And feel free to address your question to any specific panelist or the whole panel.
This is for, I guess, all of them, and just the industry in general. I'm curious, how are we thinking about internationalization or serving users of like various levels of digital literacy?
Great question.
Yeah, maybe I'll start this off. Thanks for the question. So we've always been we've had an international audience from the beginning, and I know Eleven's actually quite similar, in our talks, but we're only about 25% US, I would say, and the rest of it is like rest of world, including like every country and every region you could possibly imagine. So I think it's been a high priority from the beginning, right? Because the interesting thing is a lot of the development that AI is bringing is not just things that are usable in like, oh, it's just an English thing, or oh, it's just like a US thing or something. It actually brings change in workflows across almost every country and every culture you can imagine. And it actually works, right? Like I think we've gone and launched new markets where we've had 0 users and overnight had an explosion of users in that market. But then we learned something about like that particular market where, oh, they don't like this particular thing. Or, if you think about, for example, the Middle East, right? Like text is written in the opposite way. And so that changes a lot about the UI and changes a lot about the user experience, right? And we've done a lot of work to make that, make that good and make that, as usable and as amazing of an experience as it is in any other language, right? So those are the types of efforts, we've made high priority from the beginning.
Would you say that other countries or regions are actually more readily adopting the products? Because I'm just thinking through, well, actually, maybe they can't hire the software engineer, or maybe they can't, pay for the traditional video editor, those thousands of dollars. So they're actually more readily adopting these technologies because they're bringing the cost down.
Absolutely. I mean, I think people are like around the world, people are super open to like trying something new to see if they can change their workflow, right? I think as long as you can provide something that is, once you try it, you can't go back to what you were doing before. Like that's it. That's the difference, right? If you can provide that experience in any language, any culture, any country, right? People will use the product.
Either of you have anything to add?
I mean, I think like for us, like internationalization has been like since day one there, right? Like we have a full international team, everyone is fully remote. So that actually like there's a very strong correlation, like funny enough, between like the actual employee like profile and the fact that like we're in multiple countries, everyone can be based whatever they wanted and travel and all of that stuff, and the actual user time that we've gathered, right? So yes, in the initial days, like a lot of our growth came from North America and European markets, but actually these days, when you look at the entire pie, it's like super spread out across the world. And I can relate to that purely like on the fact that like people want the best tools that will help them on a day-to-day basis, right? And like you don't really need to spend these days like thousands of dollars or like hundreds of dollars to actually produce a video, or to produce a podcast, or produce like something, right? You could do it much cheaper using tools, and that's the beauty of it. So by default, like anyone that truly wants to have a cost-efficient solution will end up like using any of the tools like Descript or like Captions or like ElevenLabs or like anything else, right, that you have out there. So like by default, you end up having like a strategy that is like about the international market, like multilingual content, like trying to like engage your audiences like at where they are and trying to like personalize it to them anyway, right? Otherwise, I think like you end up like having a problem of being very skewed towards the market. Traditionally, it's been always that like, oh, you go one market, you conquer it, and then you expand to another one. And these days, just not. It just evolved quite a lot in that one.
Yep. We have time for maybe one, maybe two more. I see one at the back, and then we'll do you last. Great.
Hi, I'm just wondering what barriers or stopgaps you might be putting in place for people who may be using your products for nefarious purposes and thinking about trust and safety.
You can probably take this one. I think like from ElevenLabs, we invest like millions every single year on actually like preventing misuse, right? And we were the first company to implement like a fingerprinting system for any content that gets generated. So since we launched, the fingerprinting has been in place. We then opened up the API and the UI to make sure that anyone could check whether something was generated by us or not. And since then, we've also like essentially like engaged on like monitoring the content that like our users generate. So that like essentially if someone is generating things that they shouldn't, then essentially we block them. We've gone as far as also to build like the no-go voices, which is a model that will prevent anyone that tries to clone a celebrity voice, for instance, right? So like we're constantly adding all of these layers to try to make sure that we stay ahead of the curve. But as I was saying earlier, like it's an uphill battle overall, right? There is always ways in which you can game it. But at the same time, like you have open source tools, right? So like we can like try to do our side of the equation, like anything that is open source, then to some extent you don't really have that much like control over those tools, right? But I think it's important. Like as a company, we will keep investing like millions every single year, and we'll increase it as the market like grows as well.
I have to just quickly ask because it's very timely, and I'm sure people in the audience are wondering, with some of the recent news around AI voices, let's just leave it at that, and celebrities. Are you finding there to be a bunch of false positives? Because I feel like that's maybe something that people wonder, right? You hear a celebrity's voice, but how unique can a voice be? And so if you're trying to filter out certain people's voices, are you finding that actually like our voices maybe aren't that unique?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, right? Like voices are not as unique as everyone thinks, but however, they quite unique. So one of the things that you end up having like false positives indeed, for sure. But what we end up doing is like, if it's a false positive, it's like, if it tells you like, oh, you don't have permission for this voice, automatically it tells you like, oh, but you can still like pass the voice capture, and it will show you the voice capture. So if you pass it because it is your voice, then you're able to actually like use your own voice, right? I have a twin brother, for the ones that don't know. We do sound exactly the same. And even my parents actually like, they sometimes they make mistakes, right? So truly like I could be talking, but like you could be thinking it's my twin brother. We have exactly the same voice. And that is a challenge that as a company we have and as a society we have, right? But I think like if you end up building layers as a product from a product perspective to help filter those false positives, I think like people understand that like you're trying to like go from like everything is free for all and then you can misuse it as much as you wanted towards like, let's put some controls, and even if there's some false positives, people understand it down the line.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Something about the product side of this too, which I do think is super important to sort of like build the safety features from the product from the ground up, like in the product from the ground up. And that's kind of the difference between offering a technology versus offering a product, right? Like if you just say, hey, come to our website, make deep fakes, right? Like that's not gonna, that's offering a technology, right? Like, and some people might be out there doing that, right? I don't know, right? But I think if you build that into a product, like for example, we have the language translation feature, right? Which can like translate sort of whatever you're speaking to a different language, changes your lip movements as well. But, and yes, that's using the same technology, but in a very opinionated way that, you can't change what was said, but you can change what language it was said in, right? And so that limits the scope of abuse immediately quite a bit, right? And then all the traditional methods can be used on top of that as well, right?
Or anything to add, or?
Just that I agree. I mean, with Descript, you can create a voice clone of yourself and sort of like intermingle. We have this thing called overdub, where if I say the wrong word, I can go back and with the text say the word that I actually meant to say, and then it will, with my voice clone, kind of create that and kind of seamlessly integrate recorded speech with generated speech, which is really cool. But obviously there are a lot of misuses there. And so whenever we launch a product, we launch it with protections in place and do a bunch of testing and hire outside people to try to crack it and try to make sure that we do our very best to make sure that it's ungameable. But, like you said, people are if people are extremely determined to crack through security, like they will always find new ways to do it. And this was the case when I was in social media too, where like you do all kinds of things to try to protect your platform, and bad actors, they get up every morning and grind just as hard as you do. And so you're just sort of in the eternal struggle. And I think like every single tech product should be thinking about like, how are people going to misuse us, and making sure that they're responsibly providing a bunch of resources to stay in the fight.
All right, final question, Laura, it's just up here.
So as VP of Revenue at Eleven, how do you view the role of open source? Because as a developer myself, I would rather use, for example, Falcon 70B, which is $1 in, $1 out per million tokens, as opposed to GPT-4, which is 30 and 50 out. So do you think that open source is a threat to your business, especially as companies like Meta are kind of taking a scorched the earth approach to releasing models?
I mean, I think it's complementary, actually. You always end up having like businesses or like people that like can go and use open source, and they have the means and the tools and the knowledge to make that work. And then you end up having like quite a lot of different people that like don't really have those means or knowledge, right? So it just like ends up becoming like different sides of the business or different sides of the market, right? Like however you want to segment it. And I think like there is plenty of a space for like both open source and the actual like privately closed like models like we do at ElevenLabs. If you think about it, like as like when I think about voices, like we've been talking to each other as humans for the past 50,000 years, right? And there wasn't really a good technology that was able to replicate how we talk as humans. So the fact that like as a platform or like even open source, you're able to actually like replicate people's voices with their permission, make it sound natural, engaging, and then power a new type of like communication and like platform and experience, like that market is massive. So by default, you need to have both sides to be able to actually like counterbalance each other and push each other. But it comes also the open source at a cost, which is like the number of features that you will have is like more limited, right? So you will end up also having like less voices. So what's your preference? Like you don't have the UI. So what's your preference as a business or as an individual? Like, is it purely building on top of it? Then maybe open source is a good way. Like today, the quality is not there yet, but like I'm sure that within the next 3 years, the quality is going to be like matching anything that is like private, right? So it's going to be more about like the actual ecosystem that you build around it to make sure that like people start like using it in a much easier way and then embed it anyway. But I actually think it's like complementary. Like without one, we cannot have the other one, purely because the market like needs both sides.
So just a follow up, would you say that it's important for, I guess, picks and shovels companies, closed source, to build an application layer on top to stay competitive?
100%. I don't think like anyone that has actually built a full like LLM, if they're not able to build applications on top of it to make life easier for consumers and businesses, like you will end up struggling down the line. Whether that is in 6 months' time or that is in 18 months' time, you will struggle. because at the end of the day, like I want to like launch my own application, or like my product, or use the product like this immediately, right? And if I need to spend the next like months like coding and building the UIs and everything, I might give up and go somewhere else, even if it's more expensive, especially if I don't even know whether I have product market fit. And product market fit, like we always think about like actual startups, but like big corporates might not have even product market fit. So if you want to iterate quickly and then go to market as quickly as possible, then you might want to have like a stack that is like truly readily available for you. But once you're ready and you've tested it, and the technology feels good enough with other LLMs or like open source, then you might end up looking to switch. And we've seen that with OpenAI, like the big migration that like from developers like that started using OpenAI ChatGPT APIs and GPT 3.5, and then now they're migrating towards like Anthropic and like Mistral or Llama. That's been happening for the past 6 months. It will continue happening, right? So you validate that everything goes well, and then you figure out whether there is alternatives, whether that is like renegotiating pricing or like open source.